Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So this video is about the gold standard, petrodollars, the USA, and Saudi Arabia. The US currency was originally based on gold, silver, and copper. The Coinage Act of 1792 was signed into law by President George Washington with Alexander Hamilton, the Secretary of the Treasury. On the right, we have a gold eagle coin, flowing hair silver dollar, and Liberty Cap copper cent from the 1790s. So this is some of the oldest currency in US history. And as you can see, they are based on gold, silver, and copper. After the Civil War, US notes were redeemable in gold and silver. This is a $100 Federal Reserve note from the 1928 series, showing that it is redeemable in gold. It says redeemable in gold on demand at the US Treasury, or in gold or lawful money at any Federal Reserve Bank. The US government also used to issue silver and gold certificates. This is an 1891 series silver certificate and 1928 series gold certificate. Then in 1944, towards the end of World War II, was the Bretton Woods Agreement. 730 delegates from all 44 Allied nations gathered at the Mount Washington Hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. This meeting established the IMF and World Bank, and the United States, which controlled 2/3 of the world's gold, insisted that the Bretton Woods system rest on both gold and the US dollar. So this agreement required countries to guarantee convertibility of their currencies into US dollars, and then the US dollar was convertible to gold at $35 per troy ounce. Soviet representatives attended the conference, but later declined to ratify the final agreements, charging that the institutions they had created were quote-unquote branches of Wall Street. In France, the Bretton Woods system came to be called America's exorbitant privilege, as it resulted in an asymmetric financial system where non-US citizens quote-unquote see themselves supporting American living standards and subsidizing American multinationals. America could import more than it exports and consume more than it produces without becoming indebted to the world. American economist Barry Eichengreen said it costs only a few cents for the Bureau of Engraving and Printing to produce a $100 bill, but other countries had to pony up $100 of actual goods in order to obtain one. In 1965, French President Charles de Gaulle announced that France would convert some of its USD reserves for gold. De Gaulle said, "Without financial independence, there is no such thing as independence." So in the 60s, especially European countries started buying up gold rather than keeping US dollars. Then in the 1960s came what is called Nixon shock. The Vietnam War in the 1960s created inflation of the US dollar. So on the right is a picture of a famous photo after Americans used napalm on a Vietnamese village. And I put a black box there because that girl who was burned by napalm and is clearly screaming about it is completely naked. She is said to be 9 years old. So we can obviously see the same recurring problem in American foreign policy today in many countries where these types of incidences, children getting hurt and killed by the US military and such, we can all see this still happening today. And so nations then were trading devalued US dollars for gold and selling it on private markets for a profit. The US could no longer redeem foreign held US dollars into gold and amounted large payment deficits. In 1971, Germany and then Switzerland seceded from the Bretton Woods Agreement, and then in August 1971, Nixon directed Treasury Secretary Connolly to end the gold standard. So this is all called Nixon shock. So in summary, the Vietnam War created inflation. Because of that inflation, gold became cheap to convert US dollars into gold. So nations started converting their dollars into gold. And then countries started entirely seceding from Bretton Woods. And then Nixon ended the gold standard. As you can see, the price of gold, as denominated in US dollars, was stable until the collapse of the Bretton Woods system in the mid-1970s. Gold then became a bull market, rising greatly in price over the decades from, as we said, about 35 US dollars per troy ounce to today over 2,200 US dollars per troy ounce. Now, the next part is the 1967 Six-Day War, Israel, Kissinger, and the petrodollar, part 2. The Saudi oil embargo. So Israel defeated its neighbors and captured enormous territory in the 1967 Six-Day War, including the Sinai Peninsula. Another war started between Israel and its neighbors in 1973 called Yom Kippur. As a reaction, the Saudis enacted an oil embargo against the USA to pressure Israel to withdraw to its 1967 borders. So it's been about 6 years, and Israel has been occupying the Sinai. Egypt and Israel are, going back and forth. War seems imminent, and as you can see, the Sinai is right up there next to Saudi Arabia. So the Saudis wanted Israel to withdraw to its old borders. And on the right, the shades of green, all the different colors of green, are territory captured by Israel in 1967. So many Americans are unaware of Henry Kissinger and Secretary of Defense James Schlesinger, their reactions to the oil embargo by Saudi Arabia. But Secretary of Defense James Schlesinger suggested actually invading Saudi Arabia and the UAE and stealing their oil. Kissinger even fantasized about this and made these racist remarks. He said it's ridiculous that the civilized world is held up by 8 million savages. Can't we overthrow one of the sheikhs just to show that we can do it? That was Kissinger's initial reaction. It also shows how they think about Arabs. And so they actually plan to invade Abu Dhabi and the Saudi Arabia as a threat to Arab countries, seize their oil, threaten them, and the problem there, that way Israel can keep its territorial gains and maybe even continue their wars and take more. Then on November 21st, Kissinger publicly threatened quote unquote countermeasures if the economic pressure continued. The Saudis knew exactly what he was referring to, and Yemeni, the Saudi oil minister, he replied that there would be further oil cuts, and they would even blow up Saudi oil fields if the USA invaded any Arab country. Kissinger realized then he would have to deal with Israel more fairly and pressured their withdrawal from the Sinai. So Kissinger and Schlesinger, the defense secretary of defense, both of them are very pro-Israel, very Zionist. Kissinger himself was Jewish, and Schlesinger himself was a former Jew who converted to Christianity. So both of them were very pro-Israel. They loved the territorial gains. They wanted Israel to keep them. And to them, their initial reaction was actually even more war rather than peace. So that's what the U.S. government is. Most Americans are unaware of their actual history, but there's a lot more in American history than we're ever told about. And I imagine that's quite shocking to most Americans, or maybe not. So according to communications between Saudi Arabia and the USA, the Saudis still preferred an alliance with the USA because they disliked and were afraid of communists. In their perspective, many Jewish immigrants to Israel were coming from the Soviet Union, and the threat of Israeli aggression was also a threat of the spread of communism in the region. So they preferred to maintain America as an ally. So then, also in 1973, Secretary of State Henry Kissinger made a secret deal with Saudi Arabia to trade oil only in US dollars, thus pegging the US dollar to oil and birthing the petrodollar. In March 1974, the oil embargo was lifted and a peace agreement was met between Israel and the neighboring Arab countries. So on the right, we have Henry Kissinger meeting King Faisal of Saudi Arabia in December of 1973. So today, the US dollar is still pegged to the petrodollar. So this is how the world system, you could say, kind of is running today. And returning the gold standard can reduce American dependency on oil and stabilize the US dollar. It can also require the US government to stay within its budget, particularly the federal government, and it can prevent a future debt bubble where the US government can no longer afford the interest on its debts, which is estimated at $50 trillion in federal debt. So that's somewhere around double the current US federal debt. It won't be able to afford to pay its own interest payments, let alone pay down the debt, which is many say is practically impossible at this point. But they can control their spending, which is very possible. But they'll have to make a lot of shifts in foreign policy, shifts in domestic policy, and so on. America can't afford to be shooting missiles all over the world for so many decades, and creating all this instability. At some point, they need to just rein in their behavior and become more altruistic at the end of the day, and promote peace rather than war. Here are some of my sources that I used, and you can find these links in the video description below. If you found this video interesting or useful, feel free to like and share it. And see you later.